Welcome to Sage and Fettle Ayurveda. I am Angelina, and today we are going to be discussing Kitchari. So this dish is a mix of rice and beans that is really good for easing into better digestion. So we can use this as a cleanse after, a couple of days of maybe eating things that we aren't digesting so well, or maybe we're recovering from an illness and our digestion isn't as strong. So it's a really easy dish for our body to break down and assimilate. So it is quite a bit of food, so it just is necessary to have that much to get the nutrients and vitamins and minerals that we need to help us sustain and get enough calories every day. So one serving is roughly going to be about a quarter cup of lentils and a quarter cup of rice. I personally like to use brown basmati rice, but really the rice is up to you. Traditionally, this dish is made with split yellow mung beans or mung dal, and it's sometimes spelled M-U-N-G and sometimes M-O-O-N-G, so it just depends. So it's always a good idea to rinse and soak your lentils. So these lentils have been soaked overnight. And it's a good idea to rinse your rice as well. You don't always have to soak that unless rice is something that perhaps you don't digest very well. So we'll go ahead and get started. So you can use really any oil that you choose, but this is ghee. This is a ghee that I made, and I do have a tutorial on making ghee as well. So definitely check out sageandfettle.com for more tutorial videos on how to do this. You always want to use the same utensil for your ghee so that you don't contaminate it. Okay, so I'm going to turn this on to low, medium low, just to kind of melt the ghee. If you're using a liquid oil, like something like olive oil or something, you don't necessarily have to turn the pan on to melt it. It's already liquefied. Okay, so we'll let that melt down a bit. And so the spices that you'll need are salt and pepper, so those are kind of just to taste, just however much you like. For this dish that I'm making today, I'm using cumin powder and cumin seed, also coriander seeds. And so you can really just stick with those main ingredients, as well as fresh ginger is really a good way to kickstart your digestion as well, and we call that Agni in Ayurveda. So fresh ginger or powdered ginger really is fine. You always use less of the powder than you would of the fresh, so always just keep that in mind. Okay, you'll also want about what would equal 1 cup of vegetables after it's cooked. So something like spinach, you don't want to put 1 cup of spinach into the pan because you're going to end up with like 1/8 of a cup of spinach. So you basically would need to use about a whole bag of spinach to end up with about a cup or so. So it's good to add more than one vegetable just to kind of get a little variety and make sure you're getting all of those essential vitamins and minerals that you need to sustain yourself every day. So today I'm also using fenugreek powder and hing or asafoetida. So these are just optional. They are not necessary to make the dish. So if you can't find these things, don't worry about it. Just stick with the regular spices that you are able to access. So my ghee is nice and melted, so I'm going to turn it all the way down to low. And I'm going to start with my whole spices. So we always want to temper our whole spices just to kind of get the fragrance and to get all of the nice flavor out of them. So I'm going to use a teaspoon of cumin seeds. And you can always adjust the amount of the ingredients for your own personal taste as well. Okay, I'm going to use a teaspoon of cumin seeds. Okay, and a 1/2 teaspoon of mustard seeds. A 1/2 teaspoon of coriander seeds. Okay, pop those in there. Oh, and I did forget to mention mustard seeds are a pretty regular addition to this dish as well. So the main ingredients you should be able to access at any major grocery store. Okay, so we're going to use about a 1/2 teaspoon also of the mustard seeds. So again, adjust the quantities based on your own personal preference and your ability to digest them. Okay, so I'm just going to stir these around a bit in here, turn my heat back up to medium-low. You always want to adjust. These aren't going to be in here for very long. You just want them to be in here for long enough that they're going to start to create a lovely fragrance, and you might start to hear the mustard seeds start to pop a little bit. So again, it won't be for very long. So while that is starting to warm up, I will get those spices put out of the way so I know I have used them. Oh, and turmeric powder also is something that you need. Okay. All right. So I'm getting a good fragrance from my spices. Just kind of give them a little bit of a stir there. And the seeds might not actually pop, so that's fine. You just want to give them about a minute or so, 1 to 3 minutes, just depends. And just until they get a little good fragrance. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to add my vegetables. Just this is an optional step. I like to saute my vegetables, especially if I'm using something like a pepper or carrots or zucchini, because it kind of really absorbs the lovely flavors from the spices and the ghee. So I'm going to get my vegetables here. So I'm not going to put my fresh ginger in just yet. I'm going to do that later, but I'm going to scoop I have 2 carrots that I peeled and sliced and 1 zucchini. So that's going to be about 1.5 cups or so for me. And again, you can adjust this based on your own individual dietary needs. Okay, so you can hear it's starting to sizzle a little. Give it a stir, let everything get coated. This step is also just a nice way to break up everything so that all of the vegetables get just a little bit of that ghee and a little bit of the spices before everything else gets added to the pot. And zucchini tends to like to stick together because of the moisture, so I like to break apart the pieces as best that I can. All right, so I've got a good saute going. I'm going to lower my heat all the way down, and I'm going to add my ground spices. And so we want to temper the ground spices just a little bit. The reason we don't want to put them in at the beginning with the whole spices is that they will have a higher potential to burn. So I'm going to use a 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric. Okay, and a 1/4 teaspoon of fenugreek. Again, the fenugreek is optional. You do not have to use it. Kind of gives it a nice little nutty flavor. And a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cumin. Okay, so give that in there. And then we'll give it a stir. Just kind of so the smaller something is, the shorter amount of time it needs to cook. And so that's why tempering the dry spices doesn't take quite as long. So, and then we just want to let them absorb into the vegetables just a bit. Okay. All right, so we've got that going. So I'm going to just sprinkle a little bit of hing. So hing or asafoetida is very pungent or like very aromatic. Not spicy, but it's very aromatic. So it's not always pleasant for certain noses, but you only really just need a teeny tiny bit. So I'm just going to sprinkle just a little bit in there. Okay, and it's not very much. Okay. Typically when you buy it at the store or get it online, it'll come in a plastic bottle. I always transfer it into a glass one because it does help with the containing the aroma. I'm just going to give that a stir. So if you ever choose to use hing or asafoetida in your cooking, that's always a good idea to temper it or basically give it a little saute just to kind of activate the spice. Okay. So now we're ready to add everything else in. So I'm going to add my ginger. Okay. I'm going to add my lentils. And I'm going to add my rice. Okay. All right, so now's a good time to add some black pepper. So I like to use fresh cracked black pepper, so I'll just crack some in there. So again, you're doing this on low heat, so you aren't getting any steam as you work over the pot. And if you are somebody that tends to have salt cravings, it's a good idea to use the salt as a condiment later and not cook with the salt. So just a few cracks, doesn't have to be a lot. And you wouldn't really want to use more than about an 1/8 teaspoon of salt if you are cooking with this, okay? All right, so we'll add some water. So depending on what vegetables you're using and how many and all of that, you'll need roughly 3 to 4 cups of water. So I have pre-boiled this, so hopefully it will go a little bit faster. So I'm going to put 3 cups of water in here. Good. And then I'm going to stir it all together and turn the heat up to high and bring it to a boil. We're going to let this boil, come to a boil, and then we'll reduce it from a boil to a simmer. And then once we get it to a simmer, we're going to cover it and we're going to let it simmer for just about 20-30 minutes. So the difference between what you want to do with your vegetables is sometimes if you're using something like spinach or something that doesn't need as long to cook, you can cook the kitchari without the vegetables. You can skip the sautéing step. And then depending on what you're using, like spinach, you could really just add that in into the last 5 minutes. The idea is that you just want everything to cook and amalgamate together. So it's not necessarily that you have to cook it all through the whole 30 minutes, right? It just needs long enough. So the smaller something is, the shorter amount of time it needs to cook. So alternatively, if you really like sort of more crunchy vegetables, you could do the sauté with all of the spices, take them out, put them on a plate, put it aside, and then in about the last like 15-20 minutes or so, you can add them back in and let them cook. So it depends, right? If you're doing a potato, like a sweet potato or something like that, you're going to want it to be in there for the whole 30 minutes or so, however you're cooking it. If you're using like carrots or in this case zucchini, you maybe wouldn't need them to be in there as long. So I hope this is helpful for you, and it is going to be soupy. It is going to be very sort of mushy because the legumes are going to cook down. They've been soaked overnight, so they've absorbed quite a bit of moisture. But again, it's supposed to be just ever so slightly a little bit bland so that it is easy to digest. So I hope this video is helpful for you, and I hope you enjoy your kitchari. And see the comments below for any tools, spices, and everything else that you need to make your own kitchari at home. So I hope to see you again soon here at Sage and Fettle Ayurveda.